introductions really quick, just so so the people watching this know who we all are. So first we have Petra Fisher. She's a movement coach and the creator of the Fix Your Feet Boot Camp. We have Stephen Sashin, the founder of Zero Shoes. We have Ray McClanahan, a podiatrist and the creator of Correct Toes. And we have we have Jada Cherry, physical therapist, researcher, and creator of the Mobo Board. And we have Golden Harper, who's the founder of Ultra Running. And so we put together this great little panel today, and we're going to talk about how to best transition to natural footwear or barefoot shoes, minimalist shoes, whatever you want to call them. And I'm John Polton. I'm the creator of Splay Shoes. And with that, we are just going to jump right in. Jay, what are some of the biggest challenges that people see when they are transitioning to natural footwear, to barefoot shoes? Like mechanically, what are some issues that we see?
For sure. So I think, it's the reality is your body adapts to the environment that you're in. And if you're in a shoe, which a lot of people have been in, which is kind of overly cushioned and kind of like what we call this elevated heel, right? Where your heel sits a lot higher than your forefoot. What happens is your shoes get used to being loaded in a certain pattern, and they get really used to operating in a certain amount of strain, right? So the definition of strain is length under load, okay? And let me just share a personal story with you. So way back when, I was running a whole lot and still doing a bunch of strength training, and I'm a PT, so I was doing a bunch of footwork because that's what I do, right? I try and take care of myself. And this company sent me a pair of shoes and said, "Hey, look, these have a 3 mil drop. Transition them slowly, right? Don't go crazy." And I'm like, dude, late 20s. I'm running a ton. I'm pretty quick. I can do whatever I want. Right? So I put those on Christmas Eve and went for a 6-mile run. And the next day, I felt like somebody had taken shards of glass and just carved my calf into pieces. And there's a reason for that, right? So if you can think about like this little band as an example, right? This is an elastic band. I can put load in this band or I can release it, right? And so if you're used to running in a certain drop of a shoe, right? So a shoe with where the rear foot's twice as high as the forefoot, what happens is this is about the strain, right, that goes through your Achilles tendon and your calf, right? So now if you think about going through to a lower drop shoe, what happens is you're operating at a different strain rate, right? And your body will adapt to that, but it was a lot of load my body had not seen before. So I think if you're thinking about transitioning, you want to be considerate that tissues in your body will adapt. I think some people get a little overly cautious and say, okay, well, it's going to take a year to adapt. I think the vast majority of people adapt way quicker than that. Bones, tendons, muscles, ligaments don't take that long to remodel, right? So in general, it takes about somewhere between 3 to 8 weeks for your body to completely adapt. If you're someone who's going to be looking to transition into a minimal type shoe. And again, part of that is because you've got to look at different strain rates through soft tissue length. And the other part is you have to let your bones tolerate the different types of loads, not more loads, not less load, just a different types of load as that load spread throughout the bone structure and not dispersed on the cushion, right? So there are some changes that happen as you transition to minimal footwear, and you will adapt, but you need to be considerate of timeline.
John, you're muted.
Looks like we had a couple of comments about hypermobility. Petra, did you have a comment about that?
No, it was just with reference to the question for Dr. McClanahan.
So Jay, are we talking with that a time frame to adapt? Is that for someone who's running, or is that for anyone who's looking just to transition at all?
Oh, it's definitely more of the running athletes. Now for the walkers, I mean, I always tell folks, the forces that you see walking are way, way less, right? So when you talk about walking adaptation, it's going to happen much quicker than that, right? So most folks can transition in a few days, right? If not like up to 1 or 2 weeks. And again, most of it is getting used to different pressure underfoot. Some people may find this feels uncomfortable because they're used to being in overly cushioned shoes for a long time, right? And some people, tend to walk around barefoot around their house anyway, and it's not as much of a change. Ironically, we always talk about the fact that women's shoes are really bad because they're high heels, and yes, they're high heel women's shoes, which are narrow and not the optimal environment. But you know what? A lot of women also spend time in ballet flats and kind of moccasin type shoes, and which are inherently closer to a minimal shoe anyway. So again, it depends on what your history of footwear is, right? So I would say that to adapt, for walking daily life into minimal footwear is definitely a smart thing to do. It increases ground feel and proprioception and position sense. Those are all great things for long-term health, and it's something that should not be looked at as a challenge, right? I would say that it's different. Anything you start new is different, right? But I wouldn't be afraid of it, and look at this as a long-term lens of, it's going to take me a year to adapt. Likely not for walking around at all, right? And athletes out there, there's certainly an adaptation period. Just to you would never want to throw in a huge shoe change 2 weeks before your peak race of the year, right? That just would make sense anyway. And when you add the different geometry and different cushioning properties of minimal footwear, that adds another kind of wrench to the toolbox. So it should be looked at as something which will take a little bit of time. Again, not years, and not going to be overly excessive on you. And again, those of you who are getting used to these new things, I usually tell people, like, go back and forth, right? So wear your more traditional shoes one day, then wear your minimal shoe for a half a day, right? Next day you wear it for a full day, and kind of go back and forth till you find it, you find it comfortable. But there are plenty of minimal footwear shoe designs out there. There are lots of great ones, and just like anything, right? You want to find one that feels good on your foot.
I have so many things to add.
Yep.
I don't know if we're ready to go there, but
just calm down, Golden. Just stay calm. Just in and out, in and out. I got a page.
Let's have Golden respond, and then we'll let Stephen respond as well. So,
all right. To answer the original question directly, working in the running store environment, there certainly were people that had, genetic deformities or collapsed arches or situations that did not adapt well to a non-cushioned, environment very well. I still think we can get those people in a natural platform, but I think Jay hit on something that's really important is not making a drastic switch for people. And that's always my number one rule is try to only change one thing at once. So, I'm in the business of getting people out of heels and tapered toe boxes. And I want to get them into a natural environment, meaning getting their foot in barefoot position. And that might mean that we put them in a cushion level that they're already used to, thereby only changing one variable, changing their platform. And I think for most people, that's the most important consideration for adapting, is that especially if we're talking about high impact activities. And I think Jay's also spot on that when we're talking about low impact activities, and the adaptation occurs very quickly, instantly, a day, a week, maybe 2 at most, even to a shoe with no cushioning whatsoever, unless we're talking about somebody that's doing high impact activity, or they are for example standing on a rock hard, unnatural for humans, Costco floor, or concrete floor, for example. That may require more time. But we actually did, so back to the running transition side of things, before Ultra was Ultra, at our running store, when we first started modifying shoes to be zero drop and not have any heel lift, we actually sent out surveys with all these shoes, and we sold about 1,000 pairs of shoes in the first year. And these surveys asked people all about their transition and what muscles were being used more or less, where they were getting injured, what felt better, etc. But one of the main questions we were asking is, your foot and calf muscles specifically, how long are they sore for? And we made them keep these surveys for at least 6 weeks. And then we paid them in-store credit or gift certificates to bring them back after at least 6 weeks. And what we found in general is that if we kept their cushion level the same as they were used to, and all we did was change their platform, people adapted fully in 2 to 3 weeks. If we took away cushioning from the equation, it was closer to 6 to 8 weeks before people, and that was if we just took a little bit, the shoe was a little bit less cushioning. Like we took their shoe and took the elevated heel out of it, so a little bit less cushioning than they're used to, 6 to 8 weeks. When we bumped up their cushion level a little bit, just a touch, then they adapted almost instantly or within a week or two. So I think this is another part of the equation that needs to come in when it comes to running, is the amount of cushioning affects the adaptation time in a large degree. We did a similar thing with Five Fingers when they first came out, and we found that the average runner that was running 20 miles a week plus, they took pretty much 6 months to a year, depending on the person, before they adapted. So that's a lot longer timeline for someone who's running 20 miles a week plus to adapt to something like a Five Finger that's an extremely barefoot style experience. So I think there's a lot of takeaways there, but my main takeaway for people that I think people just need to understand is, if you're doing a high impact activity like distance running on a hard, flat, man-made surface, which is an unnatural surface for humans to be running on in the first place, then my advice is only change one variable at a time. Keep the cushion level what you're used to at first, and then you can work your way down over time. But the most important thing, get your foot in barefoot position. Get your foot in the position that it's built to be in, the position it was created in the first place, and good things will happen from there. That's the main thing we got to get, and you can adapt it very, very quickly and not have to worry about it. Also, echo Jay again on rotating back and forth. That's just such a simple thing to do. Go back and forth between your old shoes and your new shoes. I could expand a ton on all that, but yeah, just a few thoughts.
John, you got to learn how to unmute yourself. Try unmuting yourself, John.
We can't hear you, John. Still can't hear you.
You're still muted.
The spacebar trick wasn't working. All right, well, thank you, Golden. So I really want to give Stephen a little time here because
thank God.
I'm not a big runner. But when I transitioned to barefoot shoes, I watched a couple videos from Stephen talking about the myths of barefoot running. And by just making a couple changes to my running gait based on Stephen's recommendations, I felt like I was able to transition much more quickly than most of the people that I know. And I know that, the barefoot shoes, barefoot running, minimalist shoes, all that have kind of gotten a bad rap over the last decade or so, with people getting injured by transitioning too quickly. And so I'd love to hear Stephen's thought on this.
Yeah. So, all right, here we go. So first we got to define a couple of terms. And I'm going to tease Golden in saying this. And I'm also indicting myself by saying that our opinions are highly related to the products that we sell and the products we develop. So, but let's talk about two things that we need to really define. One is adaptation and the other is injury. And the umbrella above all of those is that what we're all here on this call really concerned with more than anything else is form, not footwear. The whole idea behind natural movement footwear, behind minimalist barefoot footwear, is that you can adapt to a running or walking form that ideally is going to be better for your body. It's using your muscles, ligaments, tendons the way they're supposed to be used. It's putting your joints in alignment that takes advantage of the way your body is designed, more than you get something that looks like this, which can get in the way of all of those things. And so the adaptation Jay was referring to is the adaptation about what your muscles and bones are dealing with. What Golden was talking about primarily was adaptation. Well, actually, I'm not even totally sure, because the key question is about, again, form, not footwear. The second thing is how we're defining injury. So there were studies that came out that were saying that people who were switching to minimalist footwear were getting injured, but they didn't do two things. They didn't compare to a control group of regular runners. It's pretty commonly stated that 50% of runners and 80% of marathoners get injured every year. And what the injuries that they're talking about include things like patellar tendonitis, plantar fasciitis, a whole number of significant injuries that put people out for a long period of time. And in the studies that were saying that barefoot runners and minimalist runners were getting injured, the injuries they were talking about was things like temporary calf pain, temporary Achilles pain, things that, like Jay was saying, you adapt to very quickly. And to Golden's point about standing, two things about standing on a concrete floor all day long, that's kind of in between walking and running, if you will, just the amount of what you're dealing with in terms of changing to the forces that you're on. I will argue that this idea that we're not adapted to hard, flat surfaces is actually not accurate. If we go to for two reasons. One, if we go to the places where we did evolve, you'll see that those surfaces, often hard packed mud, is as hard as concrete and full of other things you don't want to step on or in. But even more, even if we didn't grow up or evolve in a particular environment, that doesn't mean our bodies aren't able to handle those new environments. We didn't evolve to do double twisting, double backflips. As an All-American gymnast, I can do that. So there's things that we can do that we didn't evolve to do. So that's what we need to address. The issue with injuries and the bad rap, we also have to back up to another piece of the puzzle. In 2009, 2010, after Born to Run came out and after Dr. Daniel Lieberman's research about taking habitually barefoot runners and putting them in shoes that looked like this, and what the effect was that they were suddenly landing with their foot way in front of their body, landing heel first with a relatively straight leg, which was sending what he refers to as an impact transient force spike through the joints, instead of, again, using the muscles, ligaments, and tendons as natural springs, shock absorbers, and joint protectors by functioning correctly. When that came out, the big shoe companies, what I affectionately refer to as Big Shoe, they were terrified that people were never going to buy another running shoe again and people were just going to go barefoot. So there was a lot of anti-barefoot press that was coming out. There was one article that was sent around that basically said if you ran barefoot, you were going to step on hypodermic needles, get Ebola, your kids wouldn't get into college, your mortgage rate would go up, and you wouldn't know how to use them. Number three. I mean, just crazy, crazy things. By the end of 2010, they were all selling what they called barefoot or minimalist footwear, and then suddenly those stories disappeared. But ironically, the shoes they were selling couldn't be further from barefoot or minimalist. So they were poisoning the well that they had just jumped in. So that was problematic. There was another point that there was one other point I was going to make about that. Oh, actually, I wanted to add one other thing. This is an interesting conversation to be having here in America. In Europe, this conversation doesn't happen because there are a number of footwear brands who've been around for over 200 years who've been making footwear that's more minimalist, more anatomically correct than what we see here from big shoe companies. They never had the backlash against barefoot or minimalist that happened in America. They never had the Vibram lawsuit, which was completely misrepresented as proving that barefoot was bad, but was actually just that Vibram said wearing our shoes would increase foot muscle strength when they didn't have an explicit study on that shoe for that result. But there were enough dots you could connect, ironically, from a study that was done on the Nike Free shoe a number of years earlier, that lawsuit settled for what was effectively pennies on the dollar compared to similar lawsuits about toning shoes, improving your butt, for example. So we have to just kind of keep a lot of this stuff in context. And to echo what Jay and what Golden said, the transition, this is another thing, can take a different amount of time based on what you're doing and who you are. So I was a cognitive psychology researcher at Duke way back when, and what I've identified are different neurological types. And what I mean is, if I gave you the simplest barefoot running instruction, I'd say find a nice, smooth, hard surface because it's going to give you the most feedback. Go for a very short run, like 20 seconds. And if it hurts, do something different until you're having fun. Now, some people, because of the way their brains are wired from wearing big, thick, padded, motion controlled, arch supporting shoes, and the way their brains are designed, they can't tell if it hurts. They literally aren't getting that feedback in a way that works for them. These are people who will do a barefoot run. They say they feel great, and they've just ripped the crap out of their foot because they had bad form and were putting too much horizontal force onto the ground. The second group of people, they can tell if things hurt or not, but they don't have great proprioceptive skills. These are people who will tell you they're not overstriding and heel striking, but you look at a video and they're overstriding and heel striking. They need a little more video feedback to just get in line with, you know, what their body's actually doing. The third group of people, they just need some cues to speed up the learning process. You'd all figure this out on your own if you just gave yourself some time, but having a few cues can be helpful for people. Like, pretend you're Fred Flintstone starting your car, so your feet are behind where your body is and they can't catch up. It's not physically possible to do that, but that's just a cue to show you a different way of moving, to kind of break out of common physical movement patterns. The fourth group of people, they're naturals. They just figured out really quickly. The problem with them is they have so much fun. It feels so good to be free of big, thick, padded, arch supporting, constricting shoes that they do too much too soon and get tired and revert to one of those previous levels. So again, what we're really talking about is form, not footwear. And the argument that I would have with Golden is, I would say one of the most important things is actually having a thinner sole to give you more feedback, which is going to give you the information to help you make that gait change more quickly. To John's point, you know, we have hundreds of thousands of customers, men, women of all ages. I mean, literally 2 to 92, who've made the transition very, very quickly by starting small and having enough feedback to get that information into that natural neural feedback loop to identify what the movement pattern is that feels best for them most quickly. And and one last thing about the studies that have come out that have been anti-barefoot. They've been typically sponsored by big shoe companies. So, and also looking at things that aren't really meaningful. So a lab here at Colorado ostensibly showed that running barefoot was less efficient than running in shoes. And what they were looking at was a VO2 max. Now, no barefoot runner had ever claimed that your VO2 max would be improved by getting out of shoes. That wasn't a claim we made. So they were investigating something just to be able to say, see, barefoot isn't as good. But the irony is twofold. One, I know all the barefoot runners around this area where I live in Colorado. Neither I nor anyone that I know was in that lab for that study. I know the people that were in that study, and they weren't habitual barefoot runners. So they were being asked to adapt to a new movement pattern. And of course, their energy usage, their VO2 max wouldn't be as good because they were trying to do something new. Oh, and the lab was sponsored by Nike. I'm not saying that means the research was tainted, but it's kind of important to know, where the money flows. And last but not least, in a related note about injuries, Nike put out a study a year and a half ago, and then again about 4 months ago, about a new shoe they developed. And the new shoe was designed to reduce injury, is what they said, as if any shoe was ever designed to increase injury. So that was sort of ridiculous. But they said that the new shoe reduced injury rates by 52% compared to their best-selling motion-controlled, padded, elevated heel, arch-supporting shoe. And it's true, it did, until you look at the numbers. When you look at the numbers, the people in their best-selling shoe in a 12-week period, over 30% got injured. And an injury in this case was defined as something significant, something that kept you from running for at least the next week, basically. At least the next week. The new shoe, there was only 15% that got injured. So roughly 1 out of 7 got injured in the best shoe, the designed to reduce injury, and about 2 out of 7 got injured in their best-selling shoe. And this is kind of like, once a week, twice a week. So which restaurant do you want me to take you to every night this week? The one that gives you food poisoning twice, or the one that only gives it to you once? The study may as well have been called Nike proves their shoes cause injuries. So, a lot of what we're talking about has to do with framing and getting a bigger context for what we're trying to do, and the players involved, and who benefits or who is hurt by the real information. And we're done.
Good stuff.
Thank you. That's great stuff. Ray, if you can hear me now, let's give you a quick question. I'd love to hear a little bit about, the importance of aligning the toes when making that transition. I know a lot of people, when they go to a wider, more anatomically correct toe box, that some of that realignment of their toes, allowing the toes to splay back out, will naturally happen. But it does seem like some people, or maybe everybody, would benefit from using a product like Correctos when making that transition to more barefoot shoes. How important is the role of a toe spacer in that type of situation? I think we got you on mute there still.
Sorry about that. Yeah. I'm a little bit biased, of course, because I've got a toe separating product, but I also think that it's critical to naturally align everything. And a lot of runners and walkers will notice a big difference when the big toe is aligned properly, which is to be wider than the ball of the foot, the arch mechanics are natural. We did a video called pronation versus overpronation, because anybody that's involved in the running community is familiar with a lot of the injuries being blamed on pronation. And what's fascinating is when most of us line up our big toe in the alignment it's supposed to be in, we no longer have a pronation problem. So I think it's critical, John, for balance. We did a balance study showing that. I think it's critical for circulation. And I certainly think it's critical for foot strengthening of the intrinsic arch muscles. So it's pretty important.
So will people who are making that transition, who don't use a product like Correct Toes, will they be able to get to that point eventually? They
will. In fact, we had a group here in Portland years ago. We called it Minimalist Mondays, where we went down on the waterfront. We just started getting people's shoes off and teaching them how to move a little bit. One of the gentlemen in the class did not wear a toe separator, but basically went barefoot for a year, did all of his running barefoot, still does most of his running barefoot. And he did a before and after photograph of his feet. He didn't use a toe separator, but his feet went back in a natural alignment. So it's interesting, the tendency for our bodies to go back to our default position if we allow them to. So really, it's not so much the need to use the toe separator, although I think it helps people get there a little quicker. The bigger critical feature is getting out of the pointed tapered toe box shoe. And if people are able to do that, get into, go barefoot, get into a sandal more often, our toes want to be wider than the ball of our foot. So it will naturally happen on its own. If people want it to happen quicker, by all means, get a toe separator.
Thanks, Ray. That's great.
John, can I jump in and offer one more thing on that too?
Yeah, please do.
I think it's interesting. We're hearing a trend, right? I mean, no matter who's been talking so far, you're hearing a trend where it's not just the shoe, right? It's what the shoe biases you to do, right? And so in the question Ray just talked about, like the toe separator versus non-toe separator. So I think those of you who are listening or watching this, kind of put things in two different distinctions, right? One is equipment, right? So you're looking for equipment that's going to help your body find a better position, right? With respect to toe split, find a better position with respect to geometry in terms of heel and forefoot, find a better position in terms of feeling the ground and making better decisions as far as proprioception, right? And all that's super, super, super important to enable you to function as best you can. The other side of that, which I want to put in there, and again, I'm biased, I'm a PT, and full disclosure, yes, I make a product to increase foot strength, but the other side of this is you need to work on your parts, right? I mean, so, we all want to wear comfortable clothes, but you also go to the gym to work on strength training and mobility work and everything else. And those of you out there who are looking to make lifelong, changes in your position, alignment, et cetera, like spending some time working on foot strength, right? Foot stability is really, really critical to make sure you're putting the best possible parts in that equipment, right? So, when we look at any successful outcome, equipment matters for sure. You want to enable you to hit your peak, but you also have to, at the back end, are you actually taking progressive steps, right? A few times a week to work on building a better foundation, a better connection point to the ground. And when you show up solid and stable and you combine that with good equipment, you see great long-term outcomes. And it's one of the things the research does a poor job of doing. When you look at research, they look at one thing, right? As a clinician who runs the biomechanics lab, I look at how all this stuff impacts one person, which is more what I care about, right? And so when you take a big step back, you look at how can I put people in the right equipment and give them the right knowledge and right programs and right tools to improve their foot strength, we see tremendous long-term successes in terms of being able to train successfully, not get hurt, and hit new PRs. And that's what we're all trying to do, is to help you out.
Well, Jay, also address what you talked about in the Washington Post article about elderly people in balance, because that's a huge thing.
Yeah. So just we hit this real quick. So the number one concern with older folks is what? Don't fall, right? When they fall, they break. Okay. And so, the classic argument you hear all the time is, as people age, right, the thing they lose is visual discrimination. So the problem is not, hiking a super rugged 10-mile trail with grandpa or grandma. The reality is they can't detect the surface transition between a threshold in a room or a carpet to hardwood or a bump in the sidewalk, right? And when you put those overly cushioned shoes on the feet, that's the equipment problem, right? You're masking that feedback, and they hit a little something, which normally most of us with a better kind of, I would say, or not, I would say, let's say less degraded proprioceptive and visual system can kind of just boom bounce from that and autocorrect without even thought, right? Those reflexes are delayed in the older folks. And so that doesn't happen as quick. And since they can't feel the ground, they tend to stumble. And when they stumble, they fall. And then they wind up with a broken hip, right? So, one of the big things is making sure with you, older folks, you've got shoes that provide enough of a proprioceptive feedback or ground feel, right? So you can tell what's happening beneath them. That's really, really critical to make sure that it's there. Going back to, I guess, the question we were trying to ask Ray originally, as far as who should be transitioning, I will say there's a big difference in what older folks need, right? Sometimes as feet age, certain parts stiffen, right? And to walk smoothly and you need to make sure you have motion at the ankle, motion at the ball of the foot to roll through. And if you lack that, you may need a shoe. It's going to have a little bit more of a rocker built in here or there to help you roll through and not stumble. But and that's where getting into talking to your clinician that you like and say, hey, what parts do I need? Right? You don't have to go cold turkey from a super built up crazy to nothing, right? There are parts in the middle of that shoe that can serve you. And so if you're in doubt on what you need, ask a local clinician, ask your run retailers you trust, and get yourself in the right equipment.
Well, I'm going to interrupt on that and say, ask someone who's actually hip to the whole natural movement idea,
right?
Not someone who thinks it's complete bullshit, because there are a bunch of those people who really have not read the research, who haven't looked at the data. I mean, I was on a panel discussion at the American College of Sports Medicine, and there were some guys from Brooks and some guys from Adidas, and they were both saying, we want to improve performance and reduce injury. We just don't have any data to prove that we can. And I said, well, here's all the data about natural movement that shows just walking in minimalist footwear builds foot strength. Here's the research showing that putting arch support in the footwear of healthy athletes reduces foot strength. Here's the research showing that putting elderly women in minimalist footwear can get rid of knee osteoarthritis. And I kept going down the line. There's tons of research backing the idea of natural movement, which I also call the dumbest research in the world, because do we really need to do studies to prove use it or lose it? That you're using your body is better than not using your body? It seems ridiculous, but ironically, that's what we have to do right now.
Yep.
That's great. And that's a perfect segue into my question for Petra. We do see, a lot of people struggling to transition or having some pain or whatever as they transition into natural footwear. And I'd love to hear from Petra, what are the things that you would recommend to someone who is struggling to make that transition, or what exercises would you recommend? Just in general, yeah, what else besides going barefoot and wearing natural footwear could people do?
Yeah, well, I think everybody's been touching on the fact that there's a big spectrum here. There's a big spectrum of bodies and of fitness levels moving into the minimalist footwear movement. The barefoot shoe is kind of the prerequisite to be able to start strengthening our feet and letting them revert to their natural position, but it's not the whole story for a lot of people. So some people are going to be fine not doing any exercises. But I would say the ones that you would really want to think about is, first of all, you want to get the ability to extend or pull your big toe up off the ground at least about 60 degrees. That's about what you need in order to get a natural walking gait. And that's what those minimal shoes are going to allow you to do with your toes. But if you can't get that much bend in your toe, that would be an absolute priority. And the same thing goes with your ankles. You need to be able to point your toes in, you need to be able to flex your ankles back. Dorsiflexion is huge, and length and strength through the calves and hamstrings are really, really important. So calf stretching, hamstring stretching, but also lengthening, really, really useful for most people. And then moving into the hips, you definitely need to get some side hip, lateral hip strength to help you walk better. And again, to help with that balance. So about 80% of your walking stride is a one-legged balance. So if you're not comfortable and stable on one leg, you need to be in order to really get the benefit out of that footwear. So that's where I would say pretty much everyone's going to benefit. One of the things that happens with human bodies is, especially things like walking, that's a reflexive movement. We learned to do it when we were 0 years old, basically. And you've been doing that without thinking about it for your entire life. And so when you go into a minimal shoe, that can have some gait changes, but the often experienced changes are not all the changes that you could have. So, you don't always get all that toe splay. So that's why you might want to get a toe separator. You don't often get the ability to transfer your walking propulsion from falling, which is what most of us do most of the time, to actually using your glutes and hamstrings to push. So I would say that even if you don't get an injury from a transition, you're going to optimize the benefits of your transition by doing that strength work, by doing that mobility work, by doing that balance training. And that's going to help you really get better benefits from the whole thing. And certainly if you are already injured, or if you get an injury in your transition, you're going to want to look at strengthening and lengthening all those areas as a priority, I would say.
That's great. Yeah, I think I think so many people are trying to figure out the best way to reduce injury, to reduce pain, and I think all these suggestions have been great. Just the simplicity that Jay brought up of just strengthening the foot. That's really what all of us are talking about, is stronger feet, and allowing us to do more barefoot, and that's going to reduce pain and movement as well. I just want to open up real quick to any last comments anybody wants to make, or anybody want to address anything anybody else has said before we end.
I just wanted to jump in quickly and say that, I'm somebody who definitely had a terrible time transitioning. I went really fast, and then I threw some natural surfaces at my feet and got injured in a way that I'm still dealing with today. So I'm very sensitive to the people who do get injured in the transition. And so I tend to kind of err on the side of caution with this. Like, I've been able to, through more barefoot time, strengthen my way through the injury, but it's still there, and it might always be. So I would say that erring on the side of going slowly and doing lots of exercises and listening to your body is never gonna go wrong.
Jay, you're muted.
Thanks. One of the biggest things I see with folks on that journey of, how can I improve my foot stability, my foot strength? If you imagine you go to a gym, right, and you're on a leg extension machine, you sit down and you basically put yourself in the machine, you just make your leg go back and forth, right? There's not a whole lot of thought that goes into moving the thing back and forth. When you get into something like foot stability, a lot of us carry a lot of bad habits, right? A lot of us, when we quote balance, all we do is lean to the outside of our foot and lean our trunk over, and we literally balance, right? That's very reactive versus very proactive. I would really encourage you, those of you who are looking for lots of resources out there, there's tons of stuff out there. Definitely Google the exercise toe yoga. Okay. Yes, it's challenging. Yes, it'll probably blow up your brain more than your foot, but you need to learn how to cue in the muscle in your feet. You want to look at more stuff? We have tons of stuff on the Mobo Board website on this too. We have a video of toe yoga and some other things. But one of the biggest problems I see is, again, people carrying bad habits, right? And so if you need help, put your hand on a chair, on a wall, on something. Give yourself another tactile point of contact so that you can feel and find contact and stability in your foot, because you're trying to train a foot strategy and not just keep carrying over your kind of compensation through, wobbly hips into your balance training. So sometimes you have to regress to progress. And it's really important to make sure you're putting quality work in. And again, small doses, spend 5 to 8 minutes a few days a week, right? This isn't strength work. It's more about feeling and finding position that happens pretty quick and effectively when you do concentrate on it.
All right, I'll jump in. So my last thought is let fun be a guide. We don't want this to be hard work. That if you're not having fun, like I said, do something different till you are. And if you want to see people who do this and have fun, just look at kids who haven't gotten into motion controlled padded arch supporting shoes. They run with, first of all, they have impeccable form. It's just amazing to watch. And they always have this weird look on their face. What's it called? Smiling. And they run till they feel like they're done, then they sit down, then they get back up and they do it again. They're having a blast. And you could do that too at any age. The other thing, the last thought is that what we talked about is this transition time and adaptation time, and that can seem a little overwhelming, but think of it this way. If you broke your arm and you put your arm in a cast, 8 weeks later it comes out and it's atrophied, and you have two choices. You can keep it in a sling and never use it again, or you can spend a little time getting stronger and have that limb functioning maybe even better than it was before. The little amount of time that we're talking about here will serve you for the rest of your life. So just think of it like you broke your body and now you just got to do a little bit of work to get it back in shape, and you'll be fine. Or you'll have the possibility of being able to let your feet and your legs support you and help you do things that you enjoy doing for the rest of your life.
Yep. Amen to that. Yeah, and I think I've just echo that, it is about form first, foot strength. And these are the two things that are really important in this discussion is getting the form and the foot strength right. And then just realizing that everyone is different. We're all an experiment of one, and everyone's going to have a different experience. Some people are going to take a long time to transition. Some people aren't going to take very much time at all. I try to speak in generalities that are what we see with most people. But you may not be one of those most people. You might be an exception to the rule. And when it comes to this stuff, for me, it's just about, let's help people find what works for them. And frankly, even when I was working full-time at Ultra, if we had people that started in Ultras and then they ended up in 5 fingers or 0 shoes, I was like, awesome, great for you. If that's what's working for you, and you've made it that far in your progression, congratulations, because you have more dedication or more ability, or whatever, than most people out there, because most people aren't willing to undertake this transition at all, let alone take the transition as far as running 20 miles a week in a barefoot style shoe. And so when they do, to me, that's an accomplishment, and good for you. And I think regardless of the level of work you're willing to put in, just know that the fact that you're even listening to this and that you're willing to make a transition at all, whether that's to a well cushioned Ultra or a non-cushioned 0 shoe, that's up to you, and you find what works for you. Everybody's different, and we at the end of the day, we want people with their feet in their natural position, getting their feet stronger, running with good form. And as Stephen said earlier, the shoe is just kind of like, or the piece of equipment is just the filter. And so for me, it doesn't matter what you're running in, as long as you're running with great form and you have good foot strength and your mobility is good. So I hope hope people can understand that, and not feel ashamed of whatever piece of equipment they happen to be running in. If you're doing those other things right, the equipment's kind of secondary.
And this has been an awesome conversation. So much great advice. I really appreciate each of you being on this and taking the time to do this. So thank you.